Christmas party? I don't think they got
And it's hard to know how to solve it. There may not be a
firefighters in the outside of the fire hall cleaning up the truck.
I hope you're right.
September long weekend was mostly
All the nights
all the place we're having.
Call this council meeting to order at 6 p.m. Need a motion for adoption of the minutes, please.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held at City Hall on Monday, August 13th, 2018 be adopted as circulated.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Praise. All those in favor? And that's carried. We have one delegation this evening. I'm going to ask Lori Carlson-Judson to take the podium, please.
Good evening. Your Worship and councillors, thank you for having us here tonight. In mid-August of this year, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? In mid-August this year, following a lengthy period of foul odor coming from Crescent Lake, a group of 18 neighbors got together from the area near the bridge in Crescent Road. We got together to discuss the issue. It was agreed that because of the problem, the month of July for us was a write-off for many outdoor activities in our area of the city. Many people commented that being outside became intolerable. Neighborhood children were restricted to playing time indoors rather than outdoors. Barbecuing lost its appeal, and when attempted, people were forced indoors to avoid the lake smell. Family gatherings and outdoor visits with friends and neighbors were forced indoors or ended early. Eye-watering, nauseating are some of the comments shared. Many of the folks who attended the meeting talked with other neighbors who were unable to attend but asked that their views would also be represented. Residents also observed the challenges for people using the path. Was not unusual to see people cover their noses as they pressed onward past the corner, or to turn back and go home or another place. Reduced activity on the normally well-used path was seen by Lakeside residents as a strong indication of the citywide impact of the odor. Comments heard in various locations throughout the city illustrated how pervasive the issue was. For example, members at the golf course talked about how awful the smell was, especially for the residents living near the corner of the causeway. Well, how can they stand the stench? It's bad enough passing by on the way for a round of golf. Comments at Splash Island were similar. To another neighbor, someone made it clear that as an out-of-town visitor, they found the odors offensive and they considered not returning because of that issue. Smell, it was not a selling feature for our community or that promotes itself as Island on the Prairies. After a number of residents in the area contacted the city regarding the issue, we were appreciative of the attention that raised and that the city did come and do something about it and dragged the mass out with the machinery. And there was a definite improvement, and we thank you for that. Our goal here is to request attention by the city in a longer-term proactive solution. And we recognize that none of us in our delegation is an expert on aquatic weed management. It's obvious to some that the odor resulted from the excellent weed kill and the subsequent rotting of the mass that had accumulated at the west side of the causeway at the Royal Road corner. Perhaps we need to re-examine the whole issue of weed control. Would floating weeds in the lake be preferable to the odor of the rotting weeds? But understanding the current method of weed control and with the prevailing westerly winds, it's easy to see that the weeds will only continue to drift and rot along the causeway year after year. Again, there will be a buildup and the smell will return. We're not looking for a solution that cleanses the lake to a pristine condition. We understand that there isn't a flow to the lake that helps circulate the water. But we do believe that the wind does move surface material along the lake, as evidenced this summer at the corner and at present, and there is nowhere for it to go other than to accumulate in the corner of the causeway. We understand that the proposed causeway plan is established. However, with the events of this summer and forecasted climate change of continued higher summer temperatures, this is likely to be an ongoing situation. And given that the shovel has not hit the ground on the Causeway Bridge project, we are hopeful that the final design will take into consideration the need for water movement between the east and west basins of Crescent Lake. In closing, we appreciate your attention to our concern, and we look forward to hearing back from Council on a plan that addresses this situation not just adequately, but in the best way possible for future years. And thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Lori. I'm going to open up to any questions from Council that you may have.
I have a comment, if I may. I think seeing the vegetation in the lake is more preferable than the stench. But living where I do, and there is no water, there just is vegetation. It's not very pretty either. So, yeah, I think that a solution needs to be found for this situation, and perhaps one of them is just to be more vigilant when those weeds would rot, to be there sooner and clean.
Councillor Fraser?
Well, just a question out of for my own interest, really. I'm not either an expert.
Can you use the mic, Councillor Fraser? Thank you.
A question that's more for my interest than anything. I'm not either an expert on weed management, but I happen to live in that part of Portage, and you're right that the smell this summer was really bad. Now, when I've read anything historically about Portage, there's been issues with algae and odors for a very long time, and I'm just wondering, I haven't lived here that long. I'm wondering if any of you have been here long enough to comment on whether this is a new or worse problem than it has been in the past, going back, say, as long as you can remember.
Well, Dave and I have been in our home on the corner of Tupper and Crescent Road for 23 years. This is the worst summer for it. It could have been the heat, the wind, all of those things, but it just caught there and it stayed. I've lived in Portage for all of my life, and I know certainly there are smells that come with the lake because it's a lake, but I don't recall it being the kind of smell where you turn around and run home. So,
Any other questions from members of Council? Councillor Buds.
My question is actually for Mr. Braden, actually for any type of response from management. We've had some time to digest the information here, and I think there's probably some type of a discussion that's had, and so just looking to hear from Mr. Braden.
Well, I can only say that the solution is not a simple one. Yeah, it was the worst I've ever experienced myself. Not very good. As far as movement of water within the lake, there really isn't much. We are planning to do what we can with the design of the causeway. But again, water movement is not going to be very good, whatever we do there.
Anything else, Mr. Braden?
Well, we hope to have the preliminary design for the preliminary detail design for the causeway in about a month's time, ready for council.
Well, we will be referring this back to administration for an in-depth look. Doug Halmerson, your neighbor, invited me down one evening about supper time, and anyway, it was pretty good by the time I got there because the mass had blown over to the island side, but it was, yeah, it was horrible. I think we all acknowledge that. As soon as we get a report back from administration, we will be contacting you, Lori, so that you can share that with your group tonight.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Okay. I thank you very much for coming out this evening, and I thank your neighbors for their patience and understanding this summer in July.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Going to move into public hearings. We're going to open the public hearing for conditional use PC 62-18. This is for 73688 Manitoba Limited. The address is 102 First Street Northwest. Is there anyone here to speak in favor or opposed to the application? One final call. Any speakers for the public?
Yeah, I'm here, Mayor Ferris, councillors. I'm just here if there's any questions in regards to the variation. I'm here to answer them.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Beers. Entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Resolved that the public hearing for conditional use PC 62-18 73688 Manitoba Limited, 102 First Street Northwest, now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Buds. All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
Sorry, just give me one moment while I open this here. Okay, CHB Developments is the applicant here, and they have applied for a conditional use to allow for a multifamily dwelling in a C2, which is a central commercial zone. Council has approved similar conditional uses in the past, and those are included there with the reference numbers. The application has been circulated to various city departments with no concerns, and public notices have been sent to all property owners within a 100-meter radius. It is the recommendation that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the conditional use application of CHB Developments, Inc. to allow for a multifamily dwelling in a C2 central commercial zone at the property 102 First Street Northwest, which is legally described as lots 392, 394, Plan 12, Parish of Portage la Prairie, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Buds. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. We'll open the public hearing for variation PC 63-18. This is 73688 Manitoba Limited at 102 First Street Northwest. Is there anyone here to speak to the hearing?
I'm still here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beers. I need a motion to close the hearing, please.
Resolved that the public hearing for variation PC 63-18 73688 Manitoba Limited at 102 First Street Northwest now be closed.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Buds. All those in favor? And that's carried.
This is for the same property as the previous hearing. In this case, CHB Development is applying for a variation order to vary the restriction of no residences on the main floor and to allow residences on the main floor in a C2 central commercial zone. Again, Council has recently approved a similar variation, and the application has been circulated to various city departments with no concerns. Public notices have been sent to all property owners within a 100-meter radius. It is the recommendation of this committee that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the variation request of CHB Developments, Inc. to vary the restriction of no residences on the main floor and to allow residences on the main floor in a C2 central commercial zone at the property known as 102 First Street Northwest, which is legally described as lots 392, 394, Plan 12, Parish of Portage la Prairie, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Buds. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. That concludes our public hearing, so we're going to move right into committees. First up is Finance Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds, please.
Thank you. One item on the committee's agenda, and that is dealing with a familiar issue here, not an issue, but a road closure, bylaw 18-H676. And just as a reminder, this is for the closure and sale of the back lane between 13th Street Southwest and 15th Street Southwest to 64087 or 8673 Manitoba Incorporated and Portage Automotive. And again, council has seen this before. This is quite a process, as everybody knows, to get through. And so we've previously approved it subject to A, passing a bylaw closing the road, B, obtaining written approval of the bylaw from the minister, and C, registering the approved bylaw and a plan to the appropriate land titles office. And that a municipality proposing to close a municipal road must give public notice and hold a public hearing in respect to the proposed closure. So now that the plan of road closing has been prepared, the first step is to give the road closing bylaw its first reading. And after that's done, it's sent to the regional planning district. So there's a lot of other organizations that are interested in this. And just to make sure that we have that covered, it'll be sent to things like Manitoba Hydro, MTS, plus a number of other provincial departments for consultation, which they could come back with concerns or comments as it relates to this closure. We also obviously reach out to adjacent property owners to see there's no concerns with that closing and selling the roadway. And there was no response after we had done that. So it is the recommendation of the committee, and I so move that bylaw 18-8676 being a bylaw to close and sell all that portion of public lane in Plan 15 PLTO MW DIV in RL 58 Parish of Portage la Prairie, shown as parcels A and B on the attached plan of road closing to 640-8673 Manitoba Incorporated, parcel A, for the sum of $1,071.56 plus all costs associated with the closing, including all required utility easements, and Portage Automotive Incorporated, parcel B, for the sum of $277.20 plus all costs associated with the closing, including all required utility easements, subject to registering all required utility easements and ministerial approval, be given first reading and advertised.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
You'll hear from me in new business once again, but that does conclude my committee report.
Councillor Buds. Next up is City Planning and Economic Development. Councillor Dreger, please.
Just a few things that we dealt with in committee at last council meeting, which I think is about 5 weeks ago. The June building reports from the Planning District, and also the second quarter PRED report, which Mr. May presented at the last council meeting. And that concludes my report.
Just the numbers were pretty impressive from June. Any indicators for the third quarter? Is that pace kept up?
Yes, they're continuing to rise, especially in the values of the permits. The permits themselves are for the most part somewhat even with last year, but the values of those permits are continuing to rise, and we'll talk about that in committee.
Okay, thank you. Community Service Committee, Councillor Fraze, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. All we have on the agenda tonight is for information, the second quarter reports from a number of committees that have direct city representation or involvement, and they're available for you to have a look at. If anybody has any questions, I could attempt to answer them. Otherwise, that would conclude my report.
Thank you, Councillor Fraze. Waterworks Committee, Councillor Wall, please.
The Waterworks Committee has no report this evening, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott, Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing for our Transportation Committee, but you will hear from me later as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Espy, the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first item is an amendment of the Citizens on Patrol Program travel compensation rate. In March of 2013, the compensation rate for COPP travel was increased by resolution to 50 cents per kilometer from the previous 43 cents per kilometer. City administration recently updated their travel rate per kilometer for employees and council with an increase to 55 cents per kilometer and suggests that COPP's rate increases accordingly. The rate is calculated using the CRA's prescribed rate, which is adjusted annually on January the 1st. For administrative purposes, it would be practical for COPP's travel rate to remain in alignment with the city's employee and council travel rate going forward, as an alternative to requiring council resolutions to approve their increases. The main goal of the Citizens on Patrol program is to be on the lookout for any suspicious or criminal activity, to record this activity, and where appropriate, to report such activities to the police. The work of the volunteers involved is of great value to the local RCMP detachment and its members. It is the administrative recommendation that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the alignment of COPP's travel rate with the city's employee and council travel rate, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor Espy and seconded by Councillor Draycott. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
And further to that, the second quarter reports for RCMP and bylaw enforcement are attached, and committee has reviewed those reports.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Espy. I'm going to move into deferred business. We have no deferred business. New business, we have a few items. First up is naming rights agreement. This is for Central Park, and this is Community Services Committee. Councillor Fraze, please.
Find the right here. The issue here is to approve a naming rights agreement with Simplot Canada Limited for Central Park. This is an issue that has received some interest and press coverage in the community already, and our alternatives are to enter into this agreement with Simplot. Effective August 29th, 2018, the name of the park shall become Simplot Central Park for a 25-year term. The city shall erect and bear costs for signage, which is to be approved by Simplot. After installation, Simplot shall be responsible for subsequent changes to signage if it's at their request. The city shall be responsible for maintenance of the signage as well as maintenance of the park to a standard that promotes Simplot's business, and in return, Simplot shall pay the sum of $100,000 to the city as follows, and it's a $25,000 per year for 4 years, ending in October 31st, 2020. And Simplot may terminate the agreement with 6 months' notice, and should the sponsorship cease to promote their business or corporate mission. The initial signage installation will be paid for with funds received from Simplot. The full agreement is attached for review, and I don't have it here, but the administrative recommendation is that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the naming rights agreement with Simplot Canada Limited for Central Park for the sum of $100,000. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Fraze and seconded by Councillor Draycott. Any questions or comments on the motion?
I just have a question regarding the last sentence there that you read. Simplot may terminate the agreement with 6 months' notice should the sponsorship cease to promote their business or corporation. Could that be before the $100,000 commitment is met?
Mr. Pato?
Through your worship to Councillor Dreger. So the agreement, that was a standard provision Simplot Canada puts into their agreements. It should the park not be representation of their values. They wanted an exit clause of 6 months. However, the $100,000 is a guarantee of the agreement. Okay. So it's more of a long-term, 20 years from now, that might not be what Simplot wants to focus on. They could remove themselves from the agreement.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or Councillor Buds?
Just something that's along the same lines, but one that jumped out for me too was the city shall be responsible for maintenance of the signage, which is fine, and all the maintenance of the park, which is fine, but to a standard that promotes Simplot's business. So when we ask our Parks Department and operations, is there any concern that the Simplot's business is different standard than what ours would be in our normal course of operations?
Mr. Pato?
Through your worship to Councillor Buds, again, that's a provision asked to be introduced by Simplot Canada, similar to Councillor Dreger's question. Should the park become in disrepair to their standards, they could remove themselves from the agreement. Again, that money is still committed to the park. Should it not be to a standard that they want to put their name on anymore, they wanted that provision to remove it with 6 months' notice. That was a standard inclusion their representations wanted in.
Okay, any further questions on the motion? Well, I do want to make a comment. I had the privilege of attending the announcement at Central Park along with a number of members of council, and just want to commend Simplot for their being a very, very good and generous corporate citizen and supporting this community. And that was really, really good to see. And again, we really appreciate that support. Okay, everybody ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Next item of new business is Finance Legislative Property Committee, appointment of auditors. Councillor Budds, please.
Thank you. A bit of a housekeeping issue here. The issue here is to appoint the auditors for the City of Portage la Prairie for the 2018 fiscal year. Just as a reminder, the city did enter into an RFP process in 2015 for a 5-year contract, and Myers-Norris Penny was awarded that. But every year we do go around just as a confirmation to the appointment of auditors, despite the fact that we do have an agreement in place for 5 years. So I know that our teams have worked together. You're going to see on the a little bit later on that there's a small revision to our financial statements, and I know our department heads and more specifically Mrs. McFarland have been working with Myers-Norris Penny to expedite the process for our audit. So next year we aren't running under such tight timelines, but it's been a work in progress with Myers, and we're happy to move that we appoint them again. So it is a recommendation of the Finance Committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve MNP as the auditors of the City of Portage la Prairie for the 2018 fiscal year.
Moved by Councillor Budds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. And the next item is also finance.
So I got Q2 financial statements for council's review, and so this is kind of updated information and kind of in a new format. So we'll go through some of it here. Just as a reminder, as everybody knows, the city's fiscal year is a calendar year, so we have our normal end of quarters for the end of March, June, September, and December. And so in 2018, the efforts will be made to provide financial statements to the City Council on a quarterly basis, and that's our first one here. Quarterly detailed financial reports for the city included analysis of significant variances to budget. That's the basis of presentation for you. The detailed quarterly reports include the statement of financial position and the statement of operation. Net for the city's general and utility funds, as well as a detailed listing of the reserves and trust accounts. So the statement of financial position, which was formerly called the balance sheet, which people are familiar with, it balances the city's assets to the sum of its liabilities and its surplus or equity. Surplus accounts include accumulated surpluses, reserves, trust accounts, and the current year's to date surplus, or in years if there was a deficit, that's where it would be held, as well as adjustments made between cash and accounting methods used by municipalities, and you've heard me talk about PSAB, or the Public Sector Accounting Board. On the other side, the statement of operations, which normally would be called an income statement, it reflects the net results by division and department of all income collected and expenses incurred year to date, percentages usage of the year's budget and comparisons to a similar time period in the prior year are used to identify significant variances and for investigation between finance and the applicable department. So if there's a big adjustment that's evident, that department, finance department, will be in contact with an individual department to have a discussion of where that variance is located. Adjustments for salaries and expenditures for employees and councillors who do work for the general and utility funds, and you guys are familiar that in budget time specifically we do share resources, both mechanical, human resources, and even our own time is split between our general and utility funds. So there are some adjustments for that. The reserve funds and trust account listings is provided for information only as part of the quarter ends financial reports, and it will not be provided monthly. This process will exclude the Q1 as the prior year's financial results are being finalized at that time period with the annual budget. I think it's important to note that this is a team approach to meet and review individually with all directors, managers, and supervisors responsible for financial results in their own areas. And so as I mentioned, on non-quarter months, so those are your July through your November, we will still get a cumulative statement of financial position and statement of operations, but we will not have the supporting data to peruse. That is going to come on quarter ends. So I'm not going to go through each one of these unless there is questions, but as you can see, this is breaking down areas where there is identified variance, and then there's an explanation for that variance. And so happy to report that things do look good for 2018 and staying within our budget, and there is no expected change in that prior to year end. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve Q2, June 30th, 2018 financial statements as presented.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. And the next item of new business is also yours, Councillor Buds.
Yes, during the appointment of auditors, I did make mention that there was a revision to our audited financial statements, and so I would like to turn it over to Mrs. McFarland for a deeper dive on that.
For the past couple of years, we've been really tight on our time frames with the year-end audit. This year was especially so. So we did meet the timelines to get the audited financial statements into the province. But in going back through those, I noticed that there was an error in the financial statements. We did meet with M&P in the summer months and have worked with them through the summer months to actually prepare revised financials. I think that's very important for us as the city to revise them because we always want to ensure that we have clean financials, and actually for the last 10 years we've had nothing but surpluses, so we've actually been doing well at managing our tax dollars coming in, primarily, which funds the operations of the city. So as a result, we have made a agreement with M&P that they will move our year-end audit, and it will be done a full month earlier, so it gives us enough time for that. You know, so we'll look again and due diligence, and if there's any anything that needs to be resolved at that point, we will do that. So I think that's basically it that I wanted to say, unless there was anything else.
Thank you. So really what we're talking about is the $100,000 transfer from general reserve to the operating results, so that was omitted, and so it's not a situation where there was a grave error in the financial statements. It was a good job by our internal department to determine that after the statements were perused. So this is reflected on page 21 of the financial statements, and you do see the revised financial statement, which will be made public, as was the first version of that on our city's website. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the revised audited consolidated financial statements for the 12 months ended December 31st, 2017.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. And finally, the Gillespie Building Reserve, Councillor Buds.
Thank you. So in perusing those reserves, one might see that there is a Gillespie Centre Building Reserve Fund. The City of Portage la Prairie established that reserve with a current balance of just over $114,000, and the fund was established and has had regular contributions made to it to smooth out the annual maintenance cost of the facility. The tenants of that facility are the Gillespie Centre, the Portage and District Arts Council, and the Heartland Community Futures. So we knew that there was an amalgamation, and that's been announced. The city assumed ownership of that combined facilities in January of this year, and city employees have been working over there to take over regular maintenance issues and to identify any capital spending that would be required. So $15,000 was included in our budget to replace the air conditioning units for PDAC, a portion of this facility, and we've commenced our procurement processes to replace the air conditioning units and have determined that the budget allocation from this reserve will be insufficient to complete the work. So basically now we have the lowest bid for that work to be almost $20,000 at $19,100. So to complete the required building repairs, administration has asked us to withdraw an additional $10,000, and that will also help out with $4,000 needed to replace the PDAC air conditioning units. These repairs will include replacing ramp flooring, which is also used for wheelchair access to Heartland. So doing a little bit more than just the air conditioning with the additional request. So we have the money in the reserve, and basically this recommendation is just to remove $10,000. So it is, again, the recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve withdrawal of up to $10,000 to be expensed to the Gillespie Centre Building Reserve Fund.
Moved by Councillor Buds and second by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. So we have more new business, but we're going to move into Planning Economic Development Committee. Councillor Dreger, this next item is yours.
Thank you. This application for rezoning property is presented by Ryan Muirhead, and it's for a parcel of land on Old Bridge Road. Mr. Muirhead is who owns this property, which is presently zoned AL, Limited Agriculture, and he wishes to rezone it to RR, which is Rural Residential. The application will be circulated to the province for review and comment after first reading. And as per Section 74(1) of the Planning Act, Council shall indicate its intention to enact a zoning bylaw amendment by giving first reading and proceed with public notice as set out in Section 8. First reading of bylaw number 18-8677 will commence the process as defined in the Planning Act in considering this application. It is the recommendation that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie give bylaw number 18-8677 first reading and provide public notices as defined in Section 168 of the Planning Act. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Fraze. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. The 2018 paving program, this is new business. Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This evening we do have an issue with our pavement program, and we're looking for allocation of funding from the fuel tax reserve for the 2018 pavement program. So earlier this year, the city was advised that 2018 is the final year for municipal road and bridge program. The paving program was tendered and a contract was awarded with the assumption that the city would receive $400,000 from the province this year. In mid-August, the city did receive notice that no funding was being offered by the province. As noted in the June 11th, 2018 report to Council for the award of the contract of paving, in the event of the city receiving less than the $400,000 in provincial funding, funds could be taken from the fuel tax reserve. The city also requested $50,000 from the Provincial Active Transportation Fund. However, we didn't receive any of those funds. The Municipal Act allows for funding to be taken from a reserve fund if a project scope is related to the reserve fund scope. In this case, the pavement program is directly in line with the purpose of the fuel tax grant and reserve. The 2018 pavement contract, which includes sidewalks, is behind schedule and is expected to be complete by the end of September at an estimated cost of $850,000, excluding the RM contribution for cost-shared roads. City's budgeted contribution for paving and paths is $524,000. Therefore, the required reallocation from the fuel tax reserve is estimated at $330,000. It is unknown at this time if there will be adequate funds to cover the shortfall due to the lack of the grant funds in the anticipated year-end surplus. So it is the administrative recommendation that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie authorize the allocation of $330,000 from the fuel tax reserve to the 2018 pavement program. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Dreger and seconded by Councillor Espy. Moved by Councillor Draycott, seconded by Councillor Espy. Questions and comments on the motion? Councillor Draycott.
So just a comment from a Transportation Committee. This process, though it is not a surprise, is incredibly disappointing for our operations department and our city as a whole. We have come to expect this money from the province. As Our roads are very important to us, and our funding that we receive as the city is very limited just to our tax base. Therefore, if we are expected to use only our tax base to repair our roads, that is a huge burden to the city in infrastructure costs. So this, for me, was incredibly disappointing to see, though not unexpected. And I would just like to make that statement from my chair.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Well, I know the disappointment is shared with every city in this province. I've talked to a number of mayors, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this later. This program, for members of the public that may not be familiar with it, has been in place for the last 5 years between the provincial government and cities and municipalities in this province. And very little or no notice was given that it was ceasing, so it is very disappointing. Any further questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. We're going to move back to Finance Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Budds, City Real Property Purchases.
Before that, we'll just do the municipal, the Municipal Road Improvement Program and a resolution that we want to bring through to AMM, and really just a really good segue and echo the comments made by Councillor Draycott and Your Worship. Just in summary then, the Municipal Road Improvement Program was developed in partnership with AMM and provides 50-50 cost-sharing funding for municipal road and bridge projects. So as mentioned, we have accessed these funds on numerous occasions to supplement some of our road work here in our city. In 2017, $14 million was available to municipalities, which resulted in at least $28 million in critical road and bridge renewal in the province. And in 2018, only $2.2 million was made available to municipalities with this program. So just for our own impact, as we heard, we didn't have the $400,000 that we thought we were going to, and now we've had to dip into another reserve to cover that. We did that knowing, I remember all of us approving that, knowing that this was a risk with the hope that that would not come to fruition in a worst case scenario, but here we are. The province has now announced that the program will be terminated completely and to reallocate the funds to its portion to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. So it's a reallocation of their funding to complement a federal program. That program provides only $112 million over 10 years. So what that effectively means is a 20% reduction in grants to us municipalities. And it divides between roads, food security, broadband connectivity, and energy efficiency and reliability. So not only is there a smaller pool, the projects that would be accessing those funds is much larger now. So the Municipal Road Improvement Program allowed municipalities to use gas tax revenues for their matching dollars, whereas the Investing in Canada Infrastructure does not, and this will put greater burden on property taxes, as Councillor Draycott mentioned. So we're going to join a long list of municipalities with this resolution. I know this is a front and center topic at AMM, and now I'll hope that Council will support committee recommendation that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie support a request to AMM to lobby the province of Manitoba to not proceed with plans to transition the Municipal Road Improvement Program into Phase 2 of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, and instead to fully reinstate the former funding levels for this essential program.
Moved by Councillor Budds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any questions or comments on the motion? I think it's all been said. Okay, all those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. And finally, city real property purchases. Councillor Budds.
Thank you. So this item is really intended to have a designated signing officer of the City of Portage la Prairie to purchase real property, and that being the city manager. So not that this happens on a great deal of occasion, but we do look for every opportunity we possibly can to streamline and make our operations more efficient. And so this analysis is done to really address that. So there are, from time to time, the city is required to purchase land which may or may not have buildings located on it, complete projects approved during our budgetary process by council, or identified as required by the city to protect the interests of city-owned property. So if we were to give the city manager this approval, council supports a negotiation process that can involve proposals and counter proposals to purchase over a long period of time. And when council typically only meets semi-monthly, there can be negotiations that needs to take quick action, and that doesn't always happen. For the city manager to enter a purchase negotiation process, though, an initial approval by council is required for various criteria such as price range, logistic or logic to purchase, and other specific directions. So let's not, or let's make sure that we understand that this is not just a proverbial blank check to the city manager to purchase lands. This is something that he would do under the direction of council, but have the ability to make this process move more smoothly through times when we're not meeting or we're not together. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve authorization to the city manager to purchase real property on behalf of the city based on obtaining an agreement in principle from council in advance of entering any purchase negotiations with real property owners.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Wall. Any comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. We have no old business, so we are adjourning council at, numbers are certainly small, 6:45 p.m. We're going to move right into committee, and for folks that haven't been here before, committee is open to the public, it's open to the media, and we'd certainly invite you to stay with us. Call committee to order at 6:45 p.m. First up is Finance Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds.
Thank you. A few items in committee's report to council tonight. The first off, as I mentioned in council, is an off-quarter reporting month for financial statements. So you do see the statement of financial position for July and the statement of utility as well. I think it's important to just mention, I know it's highlighted, but I always like to do this, is that revenue in negative numbers, expenses in positive numbers. So when you see brackets around that, that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, and sometimes you can think that way, but it's in reverse. That is the way it is presented and for council's consideration. So when you look at it, it can look a lot worse than it really is, so that's just as a reminder, but things are on track in that regard. Is there any questions as it relates to the financial statements before I move on? Okay. Quite a few different reserve establishments here, and so the first one is the utility, and basically we're looking for approval at our next council meeting to approve a new reserve bylaw. And so during our council budget deliberations last year, we did start an infrastructure general reserve bylaw, or reserve through bylaw, and administration is now further recommending that a specific utility infrastructure reserve be established for similar reasons. While the infrastructure within the general reserve encompasses any city-owned structure or above-ground common structure deemed to be infrastructure, such as the street and roads, a utility infrastructure reserve will encompass piping for water, wastewater, and related connections for serviced homes and commercial buildings. So we're really just taking a reserve, and we're really just pinpointing where we want those funds to go to. I think it is proactive, and it's something that we need to do in preparation for all of, as we heard tonight, both from above ground and below ground infrastructure deficit that many municipalities are facing with regards to funding. So that is something that we'll be bringing forth for the September 24th meeting. Any questions related to establishing that reserve? Okay. So now the next one is to set up a new reserve for the Portage Regional Library Building Reserve for the City of Portage la Prairie. In 2018, the city amended its community grant funding to the Portage Regional Library to increase its annual rental expense to the city's internal rate. So that was a process that we started with many of the bodies that rent city facilities. To transition the library to this rate, a 5-year phase-in has been established commencing this September. and the city has committed to contributing the difference between the library's current annual rent and the amount paid to a building reserve for the library to assist with its future building maintenance and upgrades as needed. So during that phase-in period, the differences will be setting up for this reserve. Again, a proactive step to deal with aging infrastructure. We just heard about the requirement for additional funds to be taken from a reserve to fund an air conditioner and a ramp. So these things, they don't go away. So this is just another proactive step. September 24th will be a first reading for that one. Any questions on that? Okay. Now we move into some more exciting news that is coming our way, and that's to sell some purchased owned or city-owned land. And so we have an offer to consider from Penner Waste to purchase city-owned property legally described as lots 10, 11, 12, and 13, Block 2, Plan 53583, and there is a map. And obviously we have the offer in front of us here. And so they want to, that amount, those lots amount to about 13.19 acres. And they want to establish an organic compost facility, and they've submitted an offer of $48,000. They also see the potential in Portage la Prairie to develop a site similar to their current operations in the RM of Stanley near Winkler, and they're asking council to grant them the first right of refusal on several other lots for a total of 14.07 acres as a whole. So it is currently zoned for the purpose activity that is situated adjacent to agri-food industries, which will have a mutually beneficial relationship once it's developed. So positive step by Penner Waste to not only secure a spot here, but also to secure additional growth with the first right of refusal. So is there any questions as it relates to that? Okay. And my final report is another land sale. And we have Bokhari Development Incorporated to purchase city-owned, legally described as Lot 1 and 2, Block 1, Plan 1810. And again, there's a map that's highlighted there. And so this group has submitted an offer to purchase 2 parcels of city-owned land. That's about 5 acres for the development of multifamily rental housing, and has submitted an offer of $259,700, reflecting the collective 2018 assessed values of those properties. So paying assessed value. And the land is currently C3 and requires a conditional use approval in order to proceed with this project. So first step is sale, second step would be conditional use in order to erect exactly what they're looking to do there. So that will be coming up as well, and it will be moving forward on both of those with this committee's recommendation for approval. Is there any questions as it relates to that sale? Okay. Hearing nothing, I think that does conclude my committee report.
Thank you, Councillor Buds. City Planning and Economic Development Committee, Councillor Dreger, please.
Yes, we have the report that I alluded to before. These are the July 2018 combined totals of permits that have been purchased through the Planning District. Is that report up there? It is. Some of the good news items here relate to residential. There's over $2.4 million worth of permits that that have been purchased from the Planning District, whereas last year there were none in that category. Repair also is doubled from last year's value, although the number of permits are down slightly in that category. The commercial is another success in under the new department. There's $19.3 million in permits, whereas last year there was $3.5 million. So that we're seeing a huge increase there as well. And under industrial new and industrial repair and institutional repair, we see that one down the street here in with the school, all the work that's going on at PCI. There's also some good news in the farm sector. And yeah, is there any questions regarding this report?
Just have one. Am I reading it right? So 2017 year to date, 23 2018 year-to-date 46. So
In which category is that?
in the values, this is a combined report.
Right. The number of permits is 191 for this year, where it was 204 last year, but the values are almost doubled for this year.
Okay. Thank you.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councillor Dreger. Councillor Fraze, Community Services Committee, please.
Thank you, Worship. There's one item on the agenda for Community Services Committee. Some time ago, the city established a separate Portage Parks Committee to look at the state and the need for parks in our community. They have worked hard and put together a presentation and done a lot of work on the development of a park known as Central Park, the one that you recall earlier Simplot Canada donated some funds to. And tonight we have a conceptual report on a water-based sculpture in that park. Some members of the Parks Committee, Paige Fretz and Steve Hildebrandt, are in attendance, and I'd invite them to come and deliver their report.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Paige Fretz, and on behalf of the Portage la Prairie Parks Committee, I want to thank you for allowing us to give you an update on Simplot Central Park this evening. The Portage Parks Committee and Simplot recently co-hosted an end-of-summer party at Central Park on August 29th, offering free entertainment and food for the members in attendance. Entertainment included Aboriginal dancers, a magician, a live DJ, demonstration by Redwood Scooters from Winnipeg, and a kids zone manned by volunteers from Rock Central. Simplot sponsored the event and also provided free French fries, hot dogs, cupcakes, watermelon, and freezies. The event was incredibly successful, with a large number of people in attendance from all parts of the city and from every generation. Many people took time to thank the Parks Committee for hosting the event and for having a vision for the future of the park. Social media response was also very positive, with posts from the party receiving over 10,000 views and over 500 positive interactions by people visiting our page. At the event, the announcement was made that Simplot would be donating $100,000 towards the naming rights of the park, officially kicking off our fundraising efforts. Councillor Espy has been heading up our fundraising and has been in contact with numerous businesses and organizations interested in providing funds towards the park, as well as the interactive water feature specifically. Portage Co-op has announced that the Parks Committee will be one of 2 recipients of the annual Fuel Good Day on September 18th this year, donating 10 cents per liter to community causes. Last year's donations totaled more than $8,300, and we are hoping that they'll be even higher this year. The interactive water feature is the current phase of the park. We began fundraising towards it after getting the green light from Council earlier this year. Our initial plans for a spray park have evolved in the past 2 years to an interactive water feature. This is to address some of the Council's concerns about vandalism, as there are no components above ground. Also, water features and fountains have different requirements and regulations than spray parks do. Publicly accessible water-based infrastructure, such as decorative fountains, are not regulated under the Public Health Act. However, water must be monitored and periodically disinfected to prevent the formation of bacteria and the spread of illness. Fountains must also provide high-quality water filtration. The use of a recirculating system is most effective to minimize water usage. Ground sprays turn on and off based on pre-programmed choreography, and lights and art can accent the fountain as well. Water will re-enter the recirculating system through the surface of the fountain, with a small amount of water leaving the system to spill into the planned bioswale, which will become a future toboggan hill within the skate park component of the park. In the water-based sculpture concept report by Scatliff, Miller, and Murray, legacy costs range from $12,500 to $33,500 for a recirculating system. These costs are broken down further, with up to $10,000 for water per year, $2,500 per year for chlorine and other chemicals. The remainder of the costs are for daily monitoring of the water, requiring budgeting for 1 hour a day, as well as annual commissioning and decommissioning of the fountain. Monitoring between May long weekend and September long weekend, which is approximately 111 days, of 1 hour per day could potentially be filled by a current city employee, as could the commissioning and decommissioning of the fountain. Broken down further, 1 hour per day for approximately 111 days would likely translate closer to $3,500 than the $12,000 to $15,000 per year as outlined in the report. For reference, the province of Manitoba has provided that a direct-to-drain system spray park costs approximately $35,000 per year to operate. However, there is a substantial cost savings for water with the recirculating system. The Parks Committee is well on our way towards fundraising for the interactive water feature. We have been approached by an organization interested in providing funding for a component of the fountain, and we will be making a public announcement in October about that partnership. As well, we are in talks with the business for naming rights of the water feature specifically, and we hope to return to Council shortly to finalize that agreement. Furthermore, the Parks Committee is currently grant writing and have applied for the Community Foundation Impact Grant of $100,000. Assurance that the legacy costs for the infrastructure will be covered by the city is a requirement in order to be considered for that grant opportunity. The Parks Committee plans on securing up to $500,000 in donations and grants to continue moving forward with this project by 2019. As such, we are formally requesting approval of legacy costs ranging from $12,500 to $33,500 from the City of Portage la Prairie, with request for administration to determine if a current position could fill the requirement of monitoring the water feature. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. Are there questions from members of council for the delegation or for the presenters?
Just a comment. It sounds like you've done a lot of hard work to get to this place. Will you be coming back to council? Do you know when you'll be coming back to council for the formal request?
I might defer that to Councillor Draycott.
So as the request has been made from the Parks Committee for administration to look into this a little bit deeper so that we can determine what legacy costs actually are. The report from Scatliff, Miller and Murray uses actual data that council did receive last year. I believe it was last year that came back to council. So we would be looking for budgeting numbers in this next year's budget in anticipation of being able to continue with the work. So that would be the request.
Okay.
So I'd ask administration to prepare some estimates on legacy costs for consideration during the budgeting process for council. Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to dive in a little bit deeper. Thank you, Ms. Fretz, for your presentation for us this evening.
Thank you.
Just to go through some of the notes that Scatliff, Miller, and Murray did outline in the report that council did receive. As Ms. Fretz indicated, the numbers that they have a fairly wide range to them. And I believe, just as she had stated, that there is possibly the possibility of having somebody either fill that position or adding to a budget line in order to get to that position. So if we were to look at the average cost of $30 an hour in order to monitor that park 1 hour a day, if we're able to use an employee that we've got in place, $30 an hour at 1 hour a day is about $3,330 a year. But let's say, because operations is very good at making sure that their budget lines are not in abundance, that we don't have somebody in the city right now that could look after that. So what does that mean to us as a city? That probably means having a person 3 hours a day at $30 an hour, approximately, for 100, and because 3 hours a day, Councillor Dreger, because you require to pay somebody a minimum of 3 hours a day, I believe, right, in order to hire them. Mm-hmm. And so in that situation, then we would be looking at a labor cost closer to $10,000 in a year, in a summer, at that $30 an hour. But then you would also have an employee with the city creating a new part-time position with about 222 hours in 111 days of additional work availability for the city to use in the summer. So that's kind of a worst case scenario, I think, for us as a city, is creating another part-time position that would cost this park about $10,000 in labor costs, but you would have somebody in the city that we would give another job to that would be available to operations to work in the city, as I'm sure operations could find something that needed done. As we don't want to put that on operations, that we absolutely need that to come from them, and that's more of an administration process, I think, than a Parks Committee process. Is determining who best fits this particular scope. It is possible that we could find that hour a day somewhere within the city. So in that case, we would be moving a current budget line that already exists, if that person does exist in the city and is currently employed with us, from whatever line they're on right now to the Central Park line. And we wouldn't actually be adding any labor costs to our budget line if that were the scenario. We would be changing the line that it was coming from in order to cover the costs of maintenance of that water. Now, in my other position, sometimes we do get, my other position outside of council, sometimes we do get to the point where we like to reduce things to the ridiculous just to make sure that they make sense before you go forward on them. So let me do that for a second. 2016 census says there are 5,647 private dwellings in Portage la Prairie, though I think we should note from building reports that that number is increasing. So using 2016 numbers divided up amongst our private dwellings, $33,500 is less than $6 per year per household to maintain this park. So this Parks Committee consists of regular citizens and a couple of councillors who are working really hard in securing $500,000 in order to put this beautiful fountain in place, our next step in this park. That's just to put the pipes in the ground, and it's been a long-awaited project. We've been working on it for 6 years. We have changed the priorities from a parks perspective, adjusted the vision, and done our best to accommodate council when they previously denied the money that was allocated for this park for a water feature, so that we could change the scope of the project to better suit council, while not forgetting about the people that ask us about this project every single year. We get questioned all the time. How can McGregor have this? How can St. Rose have this? How can Morden have this? Why do we not have this feature in one of our parks? So I guess my question to Ms. McFarland, because I'm not our financial chair, could you tell us approximately what $33,000 in a possible tax increase, if that's absolutely the way that we have to go for this, what that would mean to the average household in Portage la Prairie? Not without calculating. That would be my question.
Okay, so is the committee asking for $33,000, no more, no less, or?
No, I think it would be appropriate for administration to dive into that from the council representative on the Parks Committee. The numbers that Murray, Scatliff, and Miller did give us were actual numbers based on water calculations, based on our current water rates, I do believe, because these parks exist all over Manitoba. It's not something, we're not starting from the ground up, though I guess we kind of are, but it's not something that we're reinventing the wheel. These exist, the information is out there. When parks originally came to council, they were told, we don't have legacy costs, we don't know what this is going to cost us in the future, which is what that report was to provide us with. So I guess it would make sense for administration to dig a little bit for that before council could make a good recommendation.
So administration would do that, and I'd also ask that you approach David Sattler. He took on PRA took on a similar role at Delta this year, and find out if there's there may be some expertise there that can be used.
Your Worship, if I could add to that, as much as I could see this falling into PRRA's scope, possibly, Parks is not currently maintained by PRRA with the exception of Republic Park, and I'm not sure it's at the benefit of the City of Portage la Prairie at this time to move that in that direction, as that board is not controlled by city councilors, but a combination of city and RM councilors who probably couldn't see the real value in this, though I'm sure that their municipality would use this park as well.
I understand all that, but we're still going to ask for the information. Mr. Sattler may be able to provide additional information. Councillor Buds.
Just a couple of comments, and I do appreciate the work that's been completed here, and I'm just going to roll the clock back a little bit as well. And so I remember sitting in a meeting where the establishment of the Parks Committee was approved by council, and there was also discussions around the necessity to start fundraising, and so that was born out of the initial report by the same consulting group that has the more specific water feature. And some of the recommendations that came out of that report were, well, number one was the concept for the integration of the water-based playground, i.e. spray park, must be reconciled prior to presenting the vision to the public. And that was something that I remember mentioning at that point in time, that was the first step, is to just make sure that we are all on board, both the Parks Committee as well as council, is to see, is a water feature going in Central Park? And that, I believe, at least from my chair, is still an item that is yet to be approved, at least from council, because there is no resolution at council here currently, unless I'm mistaken, that approved a water feature there. Notwithstanding that we're not going to do that, but I think that has to get done. Because it's not just the legacy costs of an individual to check the water. That's, yeah, you're right, Councillor Draycott, that's not a lot of money. But as we know, and Mr. Sattler knows, and representatives of the PRA board knows, that we have an outdoor water feature. We have one, a very established one, at Splash Island that has a lot of ongoing legacy infrastructure costs associated to it. And I know it's not the same in what's being recommended here, but there is more cost than just the annual individual that would go there. And that would take some analysis that administration is going to have to do to really bear out what will this look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now in terms of replacement of equipment, etc. That, I think, is the due diligence that's required in order to move forward here, which would then move this decision, in my opinion, as a budget item, which by that time we could probably have a lot more information. So I think we got to reconcile the fact that is a water feature what we're going to do, but we can't do that until we've got the information from administration. Fantastic job in the fundraising, but we've got to make sure that the city is completely understanding that, you know, as it is right now, and there's a lot of communities that have spray parks, but they also don't have a wave pool, indoor wave pool, and a very elaborate outdoor water park. Our recreational and leisure services spending year to date is our largest expenditure, third largest expenditure that we have here, and represents 40% of our total operations year to date spending. So there is a tremendous amount of expense that currently goes into recreation, and so at least from my chair, before I move forward with the decision making on legacy costs, there's going to be some more due diligence that's going to be required for me to be comfortable to make that decision.
Other comments or questions? Councillor Wall.
I'm just wondering what the timetable would be to see this actually constructed and operational. Are you thinking in the coming budget year that it would be operational?
So if I could address that partially, and Councillor Espy can absolutely add to it, we would expect that putting pipes in the ground would take a season, and likely if that were to happen in 2019, you would see a very minimal water usage in 2019 because of the process of putting pipes in the ground. It's very dependent on weather and frost and all of those other things, as we've seen with our pavement. Just there are things that just interrupt and you can't control them. But I think to not add it in 2019 budget would remove that availability for the City of Portage.
Thank you. Councillor Fraze.
I just have a question that may be slightly out of sequence here. I'm not talking about money, but the change in the facility from spray park to what's now termed a decorative fountain, is that correct? I'm trying to make sense out of what I'm reading in the report, and the kids don't swim or play in this the same way they would in a spray park. It just jets of water out up from under the ground.
That's correct.
But kids can still cool off and get wet on this, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. It didn't seem clear to me that this
Originally, council had issues, I think, concerns perhaps would be a better terminology for it, with the components in a spray park. When we originally presented as a Parks Committee to council, there was concerns about vandalism, about people being in the park after hours and destroying really the components that a spray park has that come over your head. Now, I'm not sure how much vandalism could happen, but I'm sure that people could find a way. But interactive water fountain has different regulations because it doesn't have the overhanging buckets. It's not regulated the same way. It doesn't have water that comes up through a component and then sprays onto you, but would have water sprays that come out of the ground. So at the Simplot party that we had the other day, I made the reference to Las Vegas. Las Vegas has water fountains all over the place, and I don't imagine that you see too many people running through them, but the idea is similar. That's what the purpose of an interactive water feature is that kids can go in and there's jets of water that you can choreograph through music or lights, or you could just have the same component as a spray park where a child would come up, put their hand on something, and then the jets would take off, and they would be interactive with them in that way that they'd still be able to play in it. It's zero entry, no standing water, so no concerns for drowning, but just a different vision to accommodate council's previous concerns.
Right. I think I understand that. I was just concerned about the kids who are looking for a spray feature to run through and get wet and cool off, and this will do that for them.
That's what that's for.
Okay.
Councillor Espy.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could roll back the clock a little farther than we already have. 8 years ago, during my first campaign, I used a document that had a picture of a splash pad on it, and it said, "Why not Portage?" So 8 years, that's how long this idea has been around. Throughout the establishment of the North End Parks Committee, which evolved into the Parks Committee, we have asked for this and been denied. We have gone back to the drawing board, come back. We've asked the city for no money along the way. At some point, we were recognized as an official subcommittee of council. Then that area that we're building Central Park on was designated for parks. Following that, we asked for the ability to fundraise, and that was granted. And after that, we announced that the first thing that we're raising funds for is the interactive water feature. No real concerns had come up that would have squashed any of this or denied us the ability to proceed with our original plan at that point. A ton of work has gone into this. The community has expressed numerous times over the years that this is what they want and this is what they're waiting for. In the grand scheme of things, what we're asking for isn't a huge amount of money. I know there's a range. It's a $12,500 to $33,500. Yes, which is it? Well, even at $33,500, in the grand scheme of our budget, it is not a huge amount of money for something that so many people have wanted and been fighting for. And there will be legacy costs regardless of what goes in the ground over there, whether it is a water feature or something else. And this is what the community has been calling for. This is what we've been fighting for. This is what I can say I personally have been using every spare moment that I have trying to fundraise for and fundraise for successfully. There was a comment or a question about the time frame. The time frame is when we raise the money, and I can tell you that we will not stop until we raise every last penny it takes to build the interactive water feature at that location. And at that point, hopefully, we will already have had the discussion and council will have already said yes to this project.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Espy. Any other comments or questions?
I may, Your Worship. I just wanted to confirm I have an understanding what's been requested of administration on this item. So first and foremost, there's a request to redefine or sort of better define the cost expectations in that range from 12 to 35 and bring that back to council during budgetary consideration. There's also a request to look into how the labor or how staff management of the long-term support for this facility would be managed, whether it would be internally or with the partnership with the PRA. And then there is also a request from council to look into the long-term capital replacement costs for this interactive water fountain, so council can look at the lifetime costs for the feature. And is that accurate, reflecting the will of council?
Councillor Butts?
So just to be clear, you have mentioned that that is something for budget considerations, which isn't until we're talking November. I just want to be clear with is that the meeting expectations or not? Because we got to be clear with that then.
In order for the parks, as Ms. Fretz said tonight, the Parks Committee has applied for a grant that is due in January. When those decisions are being made as far as the grant, the likelihood of the parks getting the grant, that I can't speak to. However, they have said that they have this as a requirement before they can consider the park for a $100,000 grant, and that is due in January. So sometimes budget is not done until January. So I would have some concerns with that.
Well, we know that first budget meetings will be taking place in November. We should be in a position to give a good indication to the grantor by the end of December.
Yeah, I see no reason why not. I mean, administration has been given instructions for investigation, and this council can have discussions prior to the year end in terms of giving some indication of where we stand on it. I know our budget will not be finalized, but they will still have a good feeling of what we intend to include.
Is a good feeling going to be good enough for the person providing the grant?
Well, will partial information be good enough to make a responsible decision? I think council needs to be fully informed. Council has very limited information this evening, and I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable making a financial decision based upon this limited information. I don't think anybody else on council would be. So I think having complete information, I think everybody on council understands the timeframes, and certainly work with the committee towards those timeframes and getting an answer prior to the end of December.
Is there an opportunity to get the information and make a decision on this prior to the budget process?
I don't believe so. I think this should be a part of the big picture and the budgeting process. This council and the last one, which you've both been part of, have worked long and hard at making sure that we manage people's tax money in a responsible way. And doing it on a one-off item is not, I don't think that's conducive to making good financial decisions. But anybody else that wants to offer up an opinion from council is welcome to.
I just concur with your comments in terms of including it in a budget process.
This decision will be a contract for the citizens of Portage for the next 30 years. So it's not something to be taken lightly. We're not making a decision on $30,000 for 1 year. We're making a decision from here as long as that park is there. And I would expect it's going to be a great park. It's going to be there for many, many years. So this is something that should not be taken lightly.
I don't think, in fairness, Your Worship, I don't think anyone that has been a part of this is taking it lightly. It's something we're very passionate about and we've been fighting for a very, very long time.
Any other comments? Okay, well then I think I'll turn it back to Councillor Fraze because this is his committee.
is there to be some motion? I haven't got anything prepared. Just to round it, that was all I had on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fraze. Waterworks Committee, Councillor Wall, please.
Yes, Your Worship, I have nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Transportation Committee, Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Worship. Nothing in the Transportation Committee.
Thank you. Public Safety Committee, Councillor Espy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing from the Public Safety Committee.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Espy. So for those members of the public that are still here, the fun isn't over yet. Before we adjourn, we're going to have question periods. So any member of the public that would like to get up and ask council a question, we will attempt to answer it for you. Evening, Ms. Anderson.
Good evening. Point 17 of the council agenda for this evening related to the Gillespie Reserve Fund, and the document that precipitated the motion makes a statement that the city assumed ownership of the combined facilities in January of 2018. That is not correct. The city has owned the building since mid-2000s. I can't give you the exact year. And then leased it to the PCCI for $1 a year, and PCCI was responsible for the maintenance costs. So the city has now assumed overall responsibility for those maintenance costs. So my question to council is, will council amend this document and anywhere else where there is a statement saying that the city has just assumed ownership when you've owned it for since mid-2000?
You bet we will.
Sorry?
You bet we will.
Thank you.
Oh, did you want to make a comment, Ms. McFarland?
I don't think it would be apparent in the public, but the Gillespie on their financial statements until this year has shown that as an asset.
And I was fundraising chair and on the board for 6 years, from 2004 to 2010. So I was on the board when the city originally owned the land under the new part, and PCCI owned everything else. And in return for the city paying off 1/3 of the mortgage, the federal government and the provincial government had initially contributed their thirds. The city had not. So we maintained a mortgage. The city made an offer to pay that mortgage, and then they would hold title to it. But we had a ruling from MNP that even though it was leased for $1 a year, they were allowed to take a depreciation credit on it. So you could clarify that, but NMP gave the ruling for us, or checked on it for us.
Okay, I'm really just looking at this from an accounting perspective in my conversations with MNP as to what has to happen with the financial statements.
Councillor Budds.
Just one further point of clarity for the official council minutes. It's the recommendation that was read, and so this was an analysis that was referred to that. And yeah, there was an error in terms of understanding the ownership of the facility, but the recommendation read, the Council of City of Portage la Prairie approved the withdrawal of the reserve. So thanks for that point of clarity, but definitely the resolution and the voting procedure is accurate.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well then, if there's no further questions, committee is adjourned at 7:26 p.m. Thank you for coming out, everybody.